Thanks for tuning in to Equity and the Power of Parks. My name is Tessa O'Connell, and I am the Communications and Public Outreach Manager at the Natural Areas Conservancy. The Natural Areas Conservancy is so thrilled to be hosting tonight's event in partnership with Prospect Park Alliance and We Act for Environmental Justice to kick off our events for Climate Week NYC. Before we get started, I just want to give a couple of rules of the road. So this event is a panel discussion. So I will be manning the tech for the evening. We'll be on Zoom here, and then we're also broadcasting this live on Facebook. So I will be watching the chat here and then the comment section on Facebook for any of your questions throughout the event. So feel free to submit at any time. Our moderator, Lauren, and our panelists, who you will meet in just a couple of minutes, will do their best to answer your questions throughout the event. And then we also have a few minutes at the end dedicated just for Q&A. So you should be able to ask your questions then as well. So that's it for me. I look forward to engaging with all of you guys in the chat. As we posted earlier, feel free to introduce yourselves, tell us where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear that. And with that, I'll now hand things over to Sue Donahue from Prospect Park Alliance.
Excellent. Thank you, Tessa. As Tessa said, I'm Sue Donahue, president of the Prospect Park Alliance, and I'm also thrilled to welcome you this evening to our Climate Week public program, Equity and the Power of Parks. I'd first like to thank our great partners at the Natural Areas Conservancy and at We Act for joining us this evening to discuss this critical issue. We're also delighted to have Lauren Graham with us from the Cadmus Group and a Natural Areas Conservancy board member who is moderating the panel. For the Prospect Park Alliance, equity and access is a strong part of our DNA. As the nonprofit that operates the park in partnership with the city, we've focused on improving the park and making it a welcoming and accessible space for all community members since our founding. The panelists tonight will discuss many aspects of equity as they intersect with our parks. This includes the essential role our parks play in connecting urban communities with nature and the importance of nature not only to our mental health and well-being, but the quality of life in our communities. We have certainly seen in these last 6 months the important place and respite parks provide in an urban environment. Our parks, as we know, clean our air and cool our neighborhoods. They provide a space for hands-on learning and engagement with the natural world around us, and for understanding the importance of trees and plants and insects and birds and other wildlife to our own livelihood. The Alliance works hard to make Prospect Park, Brooklyn's flagship park, accessible to our communities in many ways. We work to restore the park landscapes, sustain the natural environment, and make all areas of the park more welcoming. We also provide free public programs that increase visitors' knowledge of the park, which my colleague Camilla Wilson will highlight on this panel. I also want to take a minute to thank Con Edison and our other long-standing partners for their support of these incredibly important programs. And we work closely with various park groups and communities to facilitate use of our park for recreation, relaxation, and a huge variety of events. We also help to mentor new and fledgling community groups who are interested in forming public-private partnerships to maintain their neighborhood green spaces. We welcome you to get involved, and I look forward to seeing you in Prospect Park. So with that, I'm pleased to hand it over to Lauren Graham, who's going to moderate the event. So Lauren?
Thank you, Sue, for that introduction, and welcome again, everyone, to this event. This is such an important and timely conversation that we're going to have together for the remainder of the hour. And it's really important given that we are in a space where we're going through a deadly pandemic together. We're also facing the challenges of climate change, and we're also in an election year. So to underscore some of the really critical points that Sue made around accessibility and inclusion and equity and the value of open spaces and learning about how to engage with and protect our open spaces, I'm really pleased to be here this evening with a wonderful set of panelists who will introduce themselves to you in just a moment. we have with us Sarah Charlotte Powers, the co-founder and executive director of the Natural Areas Conservancy, and I'm so grateful to be serving as a board member of the NAC. Also, Sonal Jessel, the Environmental Policy and Advocacy Coordinator at We Act for Environmental Justice, and also Camilla K. Wilson, the lead park naturalist at the Prospect Park Alliance. So with that, Sarah, if you'd like to kick us off and just provide a
Thank you so much, Lauren and Sue and Tessa and my co-panelists. I'm really thrilled to be here this evening and really looking forward to our conversation. As Lauren said, I'm Sarah Charlotte Powers. I am the co-founder and executive director of the Natural Areas Conservancy. I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I grew up in the Central and then North Bronx as a kid and now make Brooklyn my home. And I think, like many New Yorkers, came to an appreciation and exposure to the natural world a little bit later in my adulthood. I had my first experiences hiking and camping and spending extended time outdoors as a college student at one of the SUNY schools in upstate New York. And after working for over a decade in the Hudson Valley after I finished college, I had the opportunity to return to New York City and to help start this organization, which really brings together many of the themes we're going to cover tonight: the importance of nature within the urban context, the importance of parks and open space for the diverse communities that call New York City our home, and the ways that we can marry together what are sometimes viewed as traditional conservation issues with urban issues that really are at the core of our lives here in New York State. So really look forward to diving into these themes a little bit more and sharing a little bit more about the work of the NAC during the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, we're going to hear from Sonal.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and thank you to the folks that put this panel together. It's very exciting. My name is Sonal Jessel. I am the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator at We Act for Environmental Justice. We are a Harlem-based organization, community-based organization that has been around since 1988, when our founder and a group of other folks were organizing to prevent what was at the time and still kind of continues to be environmentally hazardous placements of industrial sites. At that time, it was a waste transfer station up in West Harlem, which is predominantly Black and African American community, and predominantly a lower income community at the time. And through that work, We Act started, and since then we have been organizing, advocating, and doing research in issues within environmental justice, particularly focusing on environmentally racist policies that have led to disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on low-income communities and communities of color in New York City, particularly focused on Northern Manhattan. But we do policy in New York City, New York State, as well as federally as well. So in my position, I'm the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator, and I focus mostly on our climate justice initiatives and any kind of city level policy work we do. So that includes a lot of work thinking about New York City parks.
Thank you, Sonal. And Camilla.
Hi, I'm Camilla K. Wilson, and I'm the lead park naturalist over here at the Prospect Park Audubon Center. And we're essentially Prospect Park's home for nature education. And what I do is I create and deliver nature programming, from bird watching to fishing, for families with children and adults.
Thank you. So we're going to dive right into the conversation now. And of course, this is New York City Climate Week, and we're experiencing it in a slightly different format than we have in prior years. But it's important for us to still keep the spirit of what Climate Week is about, and that's keeping a focus on climate change and natural spaces and the importance of our individual and collective action. So it would be great as a starting question, and we can start with Sarah, if we could just dive into the part of the conversation. What are the, how are the impacts of climate change in New York City directly affecting your work?
Great. Great question. So climate change is something we think about all the time, year round, not just during Climate Week. The Natural Areas Conservancy is a citywide nonprofit, and we work as a close partner to the Parks Department to advance the management of the third of the city's park system, which is forest and wetland habitats. So we have a big interest in thinking about the role of nature and natural spaces on improving the quality of life, but also the environmental health of our city and the people who live here. We approach our work through a range of different avenues, but one of the things that we think a lot about is how to marry together both research that we conduct ourselves and the research of others to inform management and policy. And climate change is certainly one of the big issues that shapes the way that we think about our work. So folks who are listening to this panel may be more aware than your sort of average public, but many folks are surprised to learn that the #1 cause of climate-related deaths in the United States is extreme heat. And certainly folks who are have been in New York for the past decade remember the impacts of Superstorm Sandy. So we think a lot about the ways that the physical infrastructure of nature in our city can help mitigate the impacts of some of these leading climate causes, both the way that our management can really improve and enhance the capacity of natural spaces to mitigate the things like heat and climate, but also how the natural systems themselves are being stressed by climate change and how we can address the longevity of our natural areas and ensure that the benefits that they provide extend into the future. And we do that work through a combination of policy work, but also the creation of resources and tools that actually inform the way that restoration and management takes place to really enhance these resources now and for their current benefits, but also to ensure that they can survive for the next 100 years and continue to provide significant benefits for people and the environment.
Thanks, Sarah. Sonal, to refresh the question, how are the impacts of climate change affecting your work at We Act?
Yeah, so most overarchingly, We Act mission is to build healthy communities for communities of color in New York City, particularly Northern Manhattan, but New York City broadly. And we know with climate change that it is communities of color, lower income communities globally that are hit first and worst by climate change impacts, while they contributed the least to the problem overall. So that framing is really important for the way that we address climate change in our work. Particularly, we address it through climate justice framework for everything that we do, and ultimately are fighting both through community organizing and programming and policies and like all the different things that we do. We're ultimately fighting to make sure that our vulnerable communities are not continually sacrifice zones for the climate crisis that is existing today and is getting worse. So that's kind of like the overarching framing that we think about when we're doing all of our work. How it has changed our work is that we've begun and have been for a while now, but like weren't originally doing climate justice work. I mean, we originally started as an environmental justice organization before climate change, climate crises, climate justice, all of these terms were more prominently spoken about. And it has since then become a major part of our program and a major part of our, a major focus area that we're in, because we know there's a lot of environmental issues that aren't considered climate change issues, such as lead poisoning. That's something that we've been working in since forever, since 1988, but now we have added these other things in there. And so extreme heat is a major topic that we work at in REACT, and we're advocating for a lot of protections for our most vulnerable communities when it comes to extreme heat. And so that is not only in like adapting to the issue and trying to create more resilient communities as informed by what our communities believe that means to them, but also advocating for mitigating the issue, but thinking about equity in the process. So, you know, we don't want all of the buildings in New York City to cut their emissions if it means that we're displacing thousands of people because all of a sudden their rents are too high. So we're thinking about equity when we're trying to advocate for different policies and programs that are addressing our climate crisis.
Thanks. I really like the way that you were shaping it, hit first and worst. I think it's a good way of maintaining the focus on who really bears the burden, and that vulnerability is not just in a way of pointing people out like, this is the circumstance that you're struggling with, but it's also pointing out where the responsibility is for who should be, in some ways, like first in line to be part of the solution and to have their needs prioritized. So thank you for putting it in that context. And Camilla, how is the Prospect Park Alliance thinking about climate change, and how are we seeing climate change impacts factor into your work as a naturalist?
Well, as it relates to the Prospect Park Audubon Center, and we are a nature center, so it impacts the messages that we focus on. So our current theme is how climate change affects bird migration, and we're looking at light pollution, how that affects night migration, habitat scarcity, delay in food bearing fruit trees, and we're addressing this through carnival games. We have carnival game inspired games, and we call it the bird migration game. So through games like a beanbag toss, we cover the struggle for food and for birds, and through a balance beam with various difficulties walking on the beam, we cover, you know, that birds might have a challenging time getting from point A to point B, just like they're having a challenging time on the balance beam. And so we're trying to get those messages across through games because it makes it more palatable.
That's really great to hear. And I have a part of my background is related to gaming and using games as teaching and learning tools, particularly for climate communication. So I'm definitely interested in learning more about that work and possibly lending my support where it could be helpful. So thank you very much, Camilla. So shifting gears a little bit and opening this question up to everyone, not responding in any particular order, is the question around COVID. And Sue mentioned it in her introductory remarks, the fact that parks and the importance of park space has been really underlined as very critical during the pandemic, and creating outdoor spaces for people to congregate safely, but also to really enjoy nature. So that's really put a lot of pressure on the park system, but also really elevated the value of parks in an urban environment, particularly a place like New York City. So within that context, we've also seen people in parks being pushed to the limit. So what are some of the ways that your organization have responded to COVID and the increase in need and use and appreciation of park space within 2020?
Sure,
Well, I can start, I guess. We're not like a parks organization the way the other folks on here are, and are kind of doing a little bit more direct response. For us, a lot of our response to COVID, when thinking about parks and green space specifically, is ensuring that the people that we work with feel safe going to parks, are accessing good quality parks, aren't traveling long distance to get to the parks. Those are the kinds of questions that we were thinking about when it came to our community members, especially because we work in populations that were deemed more susceptible to severe COVID impacts and severe cases. So that was kind of like the kind of focus that we were thinking about when it came to parks, especially because we have been working really heavily on the topics of extreme heat. Like Sarah had mentioned, that you know, in the summertime, parks is like a very important place for people to go, not only to spend time outdoor with their loved ones, with their community, that's considered safe from, you know, that's considered low risk for COVID-19, but also is a place where people can cool down on a really hot day. In the summertime, it was really hot. So that was kind of like the most important piece that we were thinking about when it came to parks for WeAct. And then the kind of added layer of that was thinking about if people are using parks a lot more this summer, which we found was true, are people feeling safe there? Are community members feeling safe there? Are community members feeling like their parks are high quality, that they're good places to go? We do know that, like, you know, we heard some parks up in Harlem, for example, might have had some kind of like objects thrown about them, like on the baseball field in the middle, and it was like they can't use them as well, and like, you know, how that is kind of impacting people was another thing that we were talking about a lot, and trying to make sure that people kind of understood their rights, understood that, you know, it's a safe place to go if they feel that way, and that kind of work was more on the advocacy side and educational side for us.
Great. Maybe I can just give a little context about kind of, I think the impact of COVID on parks as a citywide resource has been kind of twofold. There's been a huge increase in all types of parks, and I'll speak specifically as well to natural areas, a huge increase in visitation to parks. We've seen in some places increased in visitation by as much as 300%. So a huge outpouring of people who need space to socially distance and spend time outside of their apartments. In this time when people are working from home, a lot of people are taking care of their kids at home. People are, you know, really counting on that public backyard as a way to have a little bit of a release valve from the stresses of this time. And then at the same time, we've seen huge cuts to the public budget and staffing to support parks. So we're sort of living in this moment where we are seeing both a huge increased appreciation and reliance on public open space and a huge defunding of basic services. And I do want to just give a shout out to both of the partners on this call, and I'll specifically say that Prospect Park Alliance has been leading the way and thinking creatively about how to use volunteer resources and to kind of reassign limited resources to just cover the bases of keeping parks clean and safe and accessible in a time when the budget for parks was cut by 15% earlier this summer. And I guess specifically as it relates to the Natural Areas Conservancy, a lot of our interest in managing access to open space is really about partnership, which is a big theme for tonight. Across the city, nonprofits that support the management of open space have experienced staff cuts of about 60%, which is a huge decline in private sector capacity to do management, layered on top of a huge decline in public sector investment. And there's been a lot of creative work that we've been lucky to be part of, to think about how to share resources and to think about how to really work together to engage community members in new and creative ways to continue to make these places accessible and vital. A lot of work around advocacy and communications, and then a couple of specific things. We've had the opportunity to shift a lot of our programming to virtual programming that's specifically focused on helping people understand where and how to access nature. So a lot of focus on how to take a first hike, how to find information about trails, how to get involved as a volunteer in parks. And we continue to think a lot about through that and our other programming, including our internship program and programs specifically focused around trails access, how we continue to be a connector between groups that have an interest in this topic and park users that are interested in finding information about how to explore and take advantage of nature in this really unique time.
One thing Sarah mentioned was the increase in park visitation, and we've been experiencing that here at Prospect Park, and that affects the way that we work. That affects the way that we deliver programming. For example, we have a pop-up program which is going 6 years strong, and what that is we bring the programs that we would normally do here at in the Prospect Park Audubon Center, and we take it on the road and we go to different places in the park and kind of deliver those programming, whether it's a hike or whether it's a fishing clinic. But with COVID, now we have to do things differently. We have to, we have kind of a, how do I say, we have a system where you can take out games and bring them back, kind of like taking out books from a library. And so when the games come back, we sanitize them and give them to the next group of people. And still trying to deliver the same quality programming, and we're still trying to get the message across. But now we have to kind of edit the way we're interacting with the public. And that also means that now we're delivering more virtual content. So that's like how to build a terrarium, or how to, there's an abundance of virtual content that we're putting out right now. And these are things that you can do at home if getting to the park isn't a possibility, or these are things you can bring into the park like a scavenger hunt.
Thank you, Camilla. So one of the themes that came up is this question around quality. And of course, we all want to access quality outdoor space. We want to see beautiful parks. We want to breathe fresh air when we're in them. But this idea of what quality means and how that intersects with equity is not something that we always talk about. And I'm curious, based on your own work and the work that your organizations are doing, how do you define quality in the context of equity? And that quality can be from the perspective of how a resident of New York City sees it, ecological quality, biological diversity in those spaces, or quality from a park or protocol maintenance standpoint. So I'm just curious if you could speak about what quality looks like and how do we close the gap between what we have right now and what we would like to do in an ideal kind of parks management system.
Lauren, I think that's a great question and really ties together the sort of multiple themes of this panel really nicely. I'll start by talking a little bit about physical quality and access, and have some thoughts as well about kind of biological quality, but that maybe is a little bit less germane to the topic of our panel. There was a study conducted in 2013 and 2014 by a team of social science researchers who interviewed thousands of park visitors to understand how they were using and experiencing parks generally and natural spaces specifically. And 50% of the people who were interviewed reported that their primary or only space where they spent time in nature was a city park. And I think for those of us who think about access to nature as a basic human right, I think there's a real challenge that we can choose to accept, to think about giving people who live in New York and call New York home a full range of high quality experiences that ranges from, you know, a fully canopied street that you live on to a high quality public playground down the street, as well as access to some of the really spectacular wild natural spots that exist within our city. Places like Inwood Hill Park in northern Manhattan, where you can see trees that are over 150 years old, beautiful wetlands in Jamaica Bay. And I think there is a lot of amazing work that's been done and still a lot of work to do to really think about the nature in our city as a network that serves people in a range of ways, and to help invest in each of those pieces of infrastructure, but also to weave them together into an identity and a set of experiences that feels really accessible to people, no matter what neighborhood they live in. Some of those kinds of investments really are place-based, and they can be made equitably across every neighborhood. And some of our big natural assets are fixed assets. We're not going to move the location of Jamaica Bay to northern Manhattan, but we certainly could go a long way to help people who live in northern Manhattan or the Bronx, where I come from, to know that there's a world of exploration that is available to them within the 5 boroughs, and to help people to connect the dots and to feel welcome in this whole range of incredible places that exist within our city.
Well, to me, equity means meeting the people where they are, and in this scenario, the people are the park visitors that we're getting to either the park or the Prospect Park Audubon Center itself. And one example I have is a child came in one day, and I'm not too sure where she's from, but it was fall, and she asked, why are the trees losing their leaves? Are they sick? Because she's from a place where the trees didn't lose their leaves. And I thought that was really cute. And that was also an excellent way to transition into explaining to her about temperate ecosystems. And so not only are we interacting with our guests figuratively, but we're also literally getting out into the communities. We were at Jackie Robinson Park about 3 weekends ago now in Bed-Stuy, and we gave the children magnifying glasses and we gave them binoculars, in kind of an effort to show them that there is nature everywhere, even in your own local park. There are worms in the tree pits and there are birds in the sky, and you can ID them, and there are plenty of them, and you can get good at it. And the kids were kind of so excited to participate in these activities. Also, we involved the community in helping keep our parks clean through our Green and Go Kit. And what that is you get a trash grabber and you get a trash bag, and you walk through the park and you pick up trash, which sounds as exciting as it is. We get a lot of people who come and want to support the park that way and keep it clean, especially now during a time where we're getting increased visitation. And we're getting all sorts of people, all sorts of races, all sorts of ages, who want to come in and take out our Green and Go Kit. So we're pretty happy about that, and you can see that I myself am happy about that.
That's great. And I resonate with what you have both said. And I like the discussion that Sarah mentioned about kind of having a range of high quality experiences when it comes to like vegetation and green space and nature in New York City. You know, we advocate for full-on parks to be created in communities, like our work for West Highland and Pierce Park and Riverbank State Park, but also, you know, some of the things we're thinking about as well that our community members have brought to us is concern that like the green spaces in public housing campuses are restricted, like they're barred off. Like, why aren't those spaces that people can be in their own kind of like place that they live? Like, why is that not accessible to them? And so that's something kind of like that's coming up for us lately, is how do we ensure not only access to good quality, big kind of like the traditional park that we're thinking about, but ensure that there's access to these smaller spaces. Also, because we learned, you know, I've learned from talking to the community members in our work, is that people are really interested in restoring nature in Northern Manhattan, and I'm sure that that's true for all over New York City. People are very interested in going back to add green spaces back into our neighborhoods. And we also learned that community members want accessible green spaces that are nearby them. We found that even like there's a huge difference in people that say they visit a space that's 5 minutes away versus 15 minutes away. And so that's something that we think about a lot, is like, how do we make sure that the green spaces that are there are good quality, even if they might be small, but then ultimately, like, ideally we increase those green spaces and we just have more of them in a place like East Harlem that just doesn't have enough, and Central Harlem that doesn't have enough. So that's kind of where we're at, thinking about like, how do we put equity into thinking about quality of parks.
That's really helpful. And when all of you were talking, I was thinking about how subjective quality is, and joking in my mind, you can't pick up the best parks of New York City and just move them closer to where everyone would like to experience them. But the idea that distance is a barrier, like, can I walk there in 10 minutes or 15 minutes? Would I have to get on a subway or a bus to get to the park of my choice, or a park that really fulfills my needs and how I engage with public spaces? So I was going to kind of put a fine point on it, just to ask about how each of your organizations can address disparities, whether that's using the levers of policy or community action. What are some of the maybe more specific tools that your organization can use, or that those of us who are joining the webinar today can use to advocate for greater equitable spaces, both in terms of access and quality?
Okay, I'll go. I guess, so my main job is a policy and advocacy person, so that's kind of my vantage point. Ultimately, we act community organizes and brings together community members to work with me to advocate for the different kind of policies that people see that they want. And by policies, I mean it can be like citywide programs, more hyper-local programs, or it can be like federal laws. Like, it has a very wide range of what I mean by policy. So really, we're kind of pulled in the direction that our community members want to go in terms of how we do that advocacy work. But at the end of the day, it's bringing together residents that are interested in advocating for, usually it's centered in Northern Manhattan, but it's often just New York City bit wide, you know, advocating for whatever it might be, whether it's we need increased funding kind of generally, or if it's we need, you know, a certain park that's kind of crumbling right now that needs to be invested in, or that's been overlooked. Whatever it might be, we do it by bringing our community members to the table and providing them the skills they need to do the advocacy work. So that's calling your city council member, that's testifying at hearings, that's making sure you're part of participatory budgeting or filling out your census, and, you know, things like that. Voting, which I strongly encourage. The things that we kind of encourage are important pieces to like making sure that we get the spaces that we need, because ultimately, you know, having champions in the spaces that in the like sort of decision-making spaces is really important. So that's the way we do the advocacy work. And so I'll say, like, you know, you asked how people can do it that are watching this now. Like, We Act takes members. We're a membership-based organization. So it doesn't matter if you live in Northern Manhattan, doesn't matter if you live in New York at all, you can join us and like work and do advocacy work with us. And we teach those skills as well as provide opportunities for actually doing that work.
Thank you for that. As a non-advocacy organization, I can talk a little bit about some of the perhaps slightly more indirect ways that our organization approaches advocacy. I would say, I think in this next 6 weeks, that census and voting would be the top 2 things on my list. I think our city is poised as we look to the future with a whole suite of local and national elections to really be on kind of one of many divergent paths depending on the outcome of some of our upcoming elections and what it will mean in terms of green stimulus dollars and access to funding that could really support all of the work that we're talking about tonight. But I would say a couple of other kind of sources for advocacy. We do a lot of direct volunteer work in parks and natural areas, so I would encourage people, if they're interested in that type of activity, to consider joining our mailing list and consider joining us for one of our events this fall. One thing that we've been focusing on with an increased kind of passion over this past year, and certainly during COVID, is expanding public access through our trails program. We are poised to release a strategic trails plan later this fall, which will tie together for the first time a vision for creating access to trails in natural spaces across the entire city in a more coherent way that includes design standards for the physical quality of the trails themselves, but also looks to create more consistency in terms of wayfinding and signage and accessibility of information about trails and open space. And then I would also just say, whatever your local park is, this is a great time to get involved as a volunteer. And I would say, it doesn't have to be because you feel responsible for offsetting the decrease in paid staff capacity, but it could be, I just hosted last night a meet and greet for neighbors in my apartment building for our local park, because we're all spending time outside and it's the one place we can really connect with our neighbors and communities right now. And that's a really powerful way as we go into the fall and the winter to stay connected to each other and to these spaces that we really care about.
One thing that we're doing at the Prospect Park Audubon Center is we're working with the Brooklyn Public Library to deliver our census information. Each time we have one of those plain go kits, we give them a little goodie bag and it has the census booklet in it. And I think that this is a very important and specific question. And I think that Sue would probably be better suited to answer this question if she's still on the line.
I absolutely am. Thank you, Camilla, and thanks all. I would absolutely echo what has already been said. I think that there are ways, big and small, to get involved and advocate, whether that be with your local council members, attending committee hearings, showing up when New Yorkers for Parks or other entities have organized outreach around supporting parks budget. So it's both voting with your feet, and then, as Sarah said, just coming out and volunteering, getting involved, showing that parks matter is so important. We know that for elected officials, for people, they're interested in what their constituents care about, and parks are more important now than ever before. And this is an opportunity, I think, to really raise awareness of what a vital role they play. And we just need as many people out there and advocating for their parks as possible.
Thank you, Sue. And that question around advocacy really also makes me think about the intersection of advocacy and education. And all 3 of the organizations that you represent are doing some work that relates to youth. And when I think of education and advocacy, I think of youth. And in particular, we've seen how critical the youth voice and the youth movement and things like Fridays for Future have been in keeping climate-related issues and the climate emergency front and center. And I'm curious if each of you could provide either a specific example of youth-facing work that you're doing, or an anecdote around how youth fit into this conversation, and particularly what we can do to support the next generation of Camilla's and Sue's and Sarah's and Sonal's, so that youth, particularly youth of color, can see themselves reflected in these open spaces and can feel that they have a career path that would lead them to diversifying the environmental movement broadly.
Well, at Prospect Park, we have a partnership with Base High School, which is literally just a few steps away from Prospect Park. And we have a program called the Park Youth Representatives. And what they do is they come into parks and they help us with interpretation. So they lead nature-based programs, they lead hikes, they lead fishing clinics, they lead bird watching tours. They teach people how to take care of the animals that we have here. You can probably see it, well, there's a turtle behind me here now. And they show people how to kind of take care of the turtles and how that relates to the ecosystem here at Prospect Park. And it's kind of a pipeline because they start off as PYRs, and then they have the opportunity to move up into naturalists in training once they've graduated high school. And there they learn to delegate responsibilities, and they learn how to be an effective team member. They learn about nature in this temperate region, and they deliver knowledge that makes them feel like pro-environment and dignified working here. And they also kind of get to learn the park in a way that they wouldn't otherwise learn the park in. They learn like where are the greatest places to fish, like where can I go birding, like where are the least visited trails. And they share this with their friends and they share this with their family. And some of them even go on into careers in sustainability. So we're very fortunate to be working with Base and to have our PYRs. And we're actually working with one now who is an intern, and he is doing a phenomenal job. He takes care of all of the animals by himself. He works with us at pop-up and handles our metrics. He puts all of that information into the computers with us. And he's really learning these skills, and it's his first job. And he's learning things that he can bring with him when he moves on in the future. And that's so important. That's so important for the youth. And it's so important for youth of color it's not a very diverse field. It's really not. I've been in the field for 7 years, and bringing in youth of color to do this sort of work really warms my heart personally. So I am so proud of the PYR program and to be a part of it.
I can just share maybe one kind of very specific way that our organization is working to create pipelines for youth into careers in conservation. We, as I mentioned at the beginning, are very focused on conducting scientific research, which is used to inform the management of forest and wetland areas. And in our first 2 years as an organization, we hired 25 research scientists who came to us from all over the country, and we conducted a full assessment of the health of all the forests and wetlands in New York City. And at the end of that 2-year period, all of those scientists returned to remote corners of the country and left New York, and we were left with this huge repository of the data that they had collected, but we did not have any of their kind of institutional knowledge. And we realized that we had this real opportunity to think about creating opportunities for aspiring young scientists in New York City to begin their careers through paid internships with our organization. And so for the past 5 years, all of our seasonal research is done through a partnership with the City University of New York, where we recruit STEM majors from across all of the CUNY campuses, and we pay them to work with us doing field research, which we then use to inform our policy work and the tools and products that we create. We've had the real fortune of having many people return and move into more senior positions within that program, as well as having some success helping people through connection with mentors to start their careers both within the Parks Department and within other organizations in the city. And I would say that's something I think, whether it's at the scale of sort of full-blown mentorship or advocating for a young person in your life or that your organization works with, or even if it's something as simple as taking a kid that you know to spend time in nature, I think exposure to nature and exposure to career pathways that relate to the environment is an incredibly powerful way to help connect youth to the topics that we're talking about today.
And I'll just quickly add a plug for the youth work we do. My amazing coworker, Taylor Morton, is leading all of our youth educational work, and that's something that we've been particularly focused on growing a lot over the past couple of years. On the policy side, we do engage in policy work and advocacy around climate education and making sure, or not making sure, but trying to make happen, like climate change education as part of a public school curriculum in New York State. So those are that's just general topics that we involve in, and because that's a very important thing for young people to understand. And we have been working with students from Washington Heights at a high school there to pedestrianize the street in front of their school. We love that project. They're like great environmental justice leaders, and they're just so smart, and they learn so much about environmental justice and like engage in advocacy on their own. We just support them. They run the whole thing. But we do have special kind of like environmental health justice leadership training that we do. It's called EADS JLT. We have one that's particularly youth focused, and youth can basically attend this training that lasts a few weeks, but it's not all day, every day. It's a couple hours that essentially trains them in being leaders in environmental justice. And it's a particular focus on youth of color in New York City. And if anyone that's listening to this call wants to kind of get a little taste of what that might be like, this week, my coworker Taylor has been hosting youth teach-ins for Climate Week. They're hosting 2 of them. There's one more tomorrow, so I'll put in the chat a link to RSVP for anyone who is a youth listening to this or anyone who has a youth that might be interested. We're teaching how to be civically engaged and what that really means for climate justice and environmental justice issues.
That's great. Looking forward to looking at that resource a little bit more. So with the time we have remaining, I'd like to do a kind of quick lightning round that will touch on some of the questions that came in the chat box that we have not woven into the conversation to this point. So one question is about funding. We already know that park funding has been a challenge over the years, and especially a challenge right now during COVID. Are there any creative funding mechanisms that are underway, whether they're being utilized by your organizations or by others, that might help to drive more financial support for parks? I hope there are. If there aren't, then then we could go to the next question. But just curious if there's something encouraging on the financial horizon.
I would say, Lauren, one of the things that we found, especially through this time, but just in general, in terms of support for Prospect Park and support for parks in general, that good partnerships with your community members, with local community organizations. For us, an organization like Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, New York Presbyterian Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, been a great supporter of ours, great community focused organization. They supported this summer our Woodlands Youth Crew. We're anxious to be able to help make sure that there were opportunities for students to be working in parks. So I would say that those kind of corporate partnerships have been really important and have been really helpful to us, and just support from our members and really building awareness of the importance of parks and supporting parks. I think if there is, and again, this has been such a difficult and challenging time for all, but it has certainly helped people to realize the importance of their park. And we've seen people really step up and really realize that they need to support their local park, whether that be coming out and volunteering or through direct donations. So I would say that, you know, building that support for Prospect Park, it's always been about their neighbors around the park, really pitching in and supporting when and how they can, and whether that be individuals or community-based organizations or corporations. We've had great success in building those partnerships.
Thanks, Sue. Another question relates to the public health dimension and how park access is important, especially for people with health disparities. Have your organizations done any work or particularly focused on that public health aspect as a key reason to support and advocate for and utilize parks and just natural spaces in general?
I'll jump in. So I'm personally trained in public health, so that's kind of the advantage to which I look at everything I do. So particularly lately, I'll just say quickly lately, what we've been doing when it comes to that topic is in our extreme heat advocacy, making it very clear that the people that are more at risk for the health impacts of extreme heat, whether that be heat illness, heat stroke, any type of kind of residual or like comorbidities, are better served by going to parks. You know, like keeping safe from the heat will help you kind of avoid potential triggers of your chronic illness. Asthma, for example, is a big one people talk about. So we do think about parks in that sense. But we also think about parks on the other side of when we're thinking about access and quality of parks. I've had multiple members or community members tell me that they don't visit the parks because they do have, say, like asthma, and therefore on a really hot day, don't walk outside farther than like 2 minutes from their home. So they can't visit a park because it's too far away. So we kind of hear about it on like both sides, and parks are like such an important resource. So that's also thinking about chronic health conditions, and any kind of health condition is also a reason why we advocate for more parks and better quality parks as well.
Thank you, Sonal. So unfortunately, we're almost out of time. I feel like we could go for more time and dig into these climate justice and equity issues. But if all of you could just provide a closing thought for the audience, and perhaps one thing that we can each do, a specific action that we can take to make our park spaces more equitable and to support our natural resources.
One thing we can definitely do is follow the park rules. They're there to create a safe, clean, and enjoyable experience for all park visitors. And if you can further invest, you can sign up to volunteer. And we have an events calendar where you can choose which sort of volunteer event you'd like to be a part of. Additionally, we do have our Green and Go kits that I spoke about a little bit earlier. And you can sign up to do that on our website. And just help us keep Prospect Park clean.
I would chime in and say, this is something I've been thinking about a lot as it relates to Climate Week, which is that parks and open space are not a silver bullet for solving climate change in cities, which I think is something that people sometimes wish we could say as a statement to make a case for advocacy. But I think parks and open space do have the unique opportunity to be a societal silver bullet for a lot of these cross-cutting issues that relate to the intersection of equity and health and climate. And I'm really excited to be on this panel tonight and to work with really creative partners to think about how we can break down some of the silos of these single issue kind of agenda and advocacy discussions, to think about how this huge public resource, which belongs to all of us, can really be activated to improve quality of life and quality of health and quality of climate for our city as a whole. And as a closing action, I'm just going to go back and say vote again. I would say if you haven't already registered, please register. Please encourage your friends to register. And after you've registered, please sign up and come volunteer at a local park.
And I'll say I'm just really glad that I was also on this panel. I think it's a really interesting discussion, and I like seeing kind of the bridge that we can all take to address climate justice or climate change is a major issue, and there's so many different ways to do it, and so many different ways we can think about parks as like the framework for it. My final call to action is the same as Sarah. Please vote. Vote for people. I'm not telling you to vote for, but you know, you can think about like vote for people that you think will protect parks and like will be interested in expanding access to parks, funding for parks. If that is something that is important to you and you feel like that is something you want to think about when it comes to kind of deciding who you vote for, then you know, it's really important. Even, and I don't just mean on our federal level, but hyper local, our city council members are so important for parks in New York City. I cannot stress that enough. Please vote locally. It really does matter. And there's a lot of really interesting city council members coming out. There's a big race next year, so definitely keep your eyes and ears open for that. But before that, vote sooner. And that's my final call to action.
Thank you all. So to summarize, vote, volunteer, donate if you can, enjoy open space, and support local action, put in a nutshell. Well, thank you to all three of you. Thank you for everyone who joined us for this hour. We have our panelists. Thank you to Sarah Charlotte Powers of the Natural Areas Conservancy, Sonal Jessel of We Act for Environmental Justice, and Camilla Wilson of the Prospect Park Alliance. Thank you also to Sue Donahue of the Prospect Park Alliance and Tessa O'Connell of the NYC for all of their hard work organizing. So I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the programming for Climate Week, and we appreciate you taking the time to talk about equity and the power of parks. So have a great evening, everybody. Take care.